What if I told you that while Trump's negotiators were shaking hands with Iranian officials in Oman just 4 days ago, 14 ghost ships vanished from every tracking system on Earth, not seized by the Navy, not stopped at any port, but completely disappeared from radar while carrying cargo that could reshape the entire Middle East conflict? By the end of this video, you'll understand why US intelligence officials are now calling this the most sophisticated deception operation in modern naval history. Let me start with what happened on February 6, 2026. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner walked into high-stakes negotiations in Muscat, Oman, sitting across from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. The official agenda focused entirely on Iran's nuclear program. Trump himself declared these talks, quote, very good, and claimed Iran wants to make a deal very badly. But here's what nobody was watching while cameras focused on those handshakes and diplomatic pleasantries. According to a State Department report released just 48 hours ago, 14 vessels from Iran's shadow fleet executed what can only be described as a coordinated vanishing act. The timing wasn't coincidental. These ships, including the Vixene, Ocean Guardian, Benny, Aqualive, and Zevs, didn't just disappear for routine maintenance or weather delays. They went dark during the exact window when global intelligence assets were focused on those conference rooms in Oman. But before we dive into what these ships were actually carrying, you need to understand the true scale of what we're dealing with. Iran doesn't operate 14 shadow vessels. According to United Against Nuclear Iran's latest intelligence assessment, they operate 542 Ghost Fleet vessels. Think about that number for a moment. That's not a few rogue tankers sneaking past sanctions. That's the largest coordinated sanctions evasion network in human history, dwarfing even North Korea's smuggling operations and Russia's shadow fleet combined. These vessels have mastered the art of digital invisibility. They systematically shut off their AIS transponders, the automatic identification systems that function like GPS tracking for ships. When a vessel goes dark, it essentially ceases to exist in the digital maritime world. According to Windward maritime tracking data from October 2025, 52 Iranian-flagged tankers simultaneously went dark for 3 consecutive days starting October 12th. Only 28 ever reappeared on tracking systems. The rest remain invisible to this day. Now here's where this story takes a terrifying turn. Ships don't vanish into thin air for innocent reasons. They disappear to hide activities that would trigger international intervention if discovered. The Center for Strategic and International Studies conducted an exhaustive investigation of a single vessel called the Bella 1, also operating under the name Marinara. This ship departed Iranian waters on February 3rd, went completely dark off the coast of Sri Lanka on March 24th, and didn't reappear on any tracking system until July 1st, 4 months later, back in Iranian territorial waters. During those 4 months of complete invisibility, intelligence analysts documented 379 separate rendezvous operations. These weren't accidental encounters with other vessels. These were planned, coordinated ship-to-ship transfers happening in international waters beyond the reach of any nation's enforcement capabilities. But here's the question that should keep you awake at night. What exactly was being transferred during these clandestine meetings? Traditional oil tankers are designed with one purpose: transporting petroleum products from producers to refineries. They're not built for carrying missiles, weapons systems, or military equipment. However, maritime security analysis reveals that vessels in Iran's Ghost Fleet have undergone significant modifications. These ships now feature extra compartments, reinforced deck structures, and cargo specifications that bear no resemblance to standard oil tanker designs. The evidence becomes even more damning when you examine the Treasury Department's response. On February 7th, just 1 day after those diplomatic talks concluded, the U.S. sanctioned 29 additional Shadow Fleet vessels. Treasury Under Secretary John Hurley didn't use standard language about illegal oil transportation. Instead, he specifically mentioned, quote, deceptive shipping practices. That word choice isn't accidental. Why would legitimate oil transportation require deception if petroleum was the only cargo being moved? The answer emerged from an unexpected source halfway around the world. Egyptian businessman Haddam El-Sid Farid Ibrahim Soccer found himself sanctioned alongside his 7 Ghost Fleet vessels. But the critical detail buried in that Treasury statement reveals the true scope of this operation. Quote, vessels associated with Soccer conducted ship-to-ship transfers of Iranian oil and made port calls at Houthi-controlled ports in Yemen. Stop and think about that routing for a moment. If these ships were legitimately transporting oil to Chinese refineries, the major buyers of Iranian crude, why would they make port calls in Yemen? Chinese ports offer legitimate trade relationships, proper documentation, and legal transaction processing. Houthi-controlled territories in Yemen offer none of those advantages for oil sales. They do, however, provide the perfect distribution point for weapon systems destined for proxy forces throughout the region. According to Iran International's investigative reporting from January 5th, vessels operating within this shadow network have been directly linked to transporting military materials to Houthi forces. These are the same forces currently launching missiles at commercial shipping in the Red Sea, the same proxy army attacking Israeli territory, the same group that has forced international shipping companies to reroute vessels around the entire African continent, adding 10 days to global transit times and billions in additional costs. Now let's examine the timeline that proves this was coordinated deception rather than coincidental timing. February 6th, American diplomats in Oman focused entirely on nuclear negotiations. February 7th, U.S. Treasury sanctions hit 14 vessels, but those sanctions arrived exactly 1 day too late. The ships had already completed their cargo transfers and vanished back into the vast expanse of international waters. The numbers tell an even more disturbing story. According to Reuters reporting confirmed by maritime intelligence services, Iran's shadow trade to China currently operates at 15 to 17 million barrels per day. That represents a 25% increase from 2023 levels, achieved despite what officials call the most aggressive sanctions regime in modern history. If Iran is exporting more oil under maximum pressure sanctions, they've obviously discovered methods to completely circumvent international enforcement mechanisms. Here's what makes this operation particularly brilliant from a strategic deception standpoint. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi explicitly stated during the Oman talks, quote, "We do not discuss any other issues with the Americans. Not missiles, not proxies, just nuclear." Why limit discussions to nuclear issues when missiles and proxy forces represent the immediate threats to regional stability? Because Iran needed global attention focused exclusively on those conference rooms while their naval assets conducted the largest sanctions evasion operation in recent memory. President Trump responded to Iranian aggression by deploying what he described as a massive armada to the region, centered around the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. According to his February 6 statement, quote, "We have a big fleet going to be there pretty soon." But here's the fundamental problem with that military response. Aircraft carriers excel at tracking conventional military threats. They monitor missile installations, patrol established sea lanes, and maintain surveillance over known hostile forces. However, carrier strike groups are not designed to track hundreds of individual cargo transfers between unmarked commercial vessels operating under false flags in international waters. While Navy radar systems focused on Iranian fast attack boats and coastal missile batteries, the Ghost Fleet executed the most sophisticated sanctions evasion operation in naval history. They accomplished this not despite the peace talks, but specifically because of them. Consider the strategic implications of Iran's venue selection. The United States originally proposed conducting these negotiations in Turkey with regional observers present. According to diplomatic sources, Iran insisted on Oman with bilateral format only. Why demand that specific location and format? Because Oman possesses limited satellite surveillance capabilities compared to Turkey, fewer intelligence assets monitoring regional waters, and provides the perfect geographic position for ships to move undetected in nearby international waters. The talks lasted exactly 8 hours, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. local time on February 6th. During those precise 8 hours, according to maritime tracking data analysis, multiple Iranian-flagged vessels operating in the Gulf of Oman simultaneously shut off their transponders, altered their planned routes, and disappeared to unknown destinations. That level of coordination doesn't happen by coincidence. U.S. intelligence agencies are now piecing together the broader implications of this Ghost Fleet operation. According to analysis cited by Global Fight Against Terrorism funding experts, this fleet serves as a primary revenue stream for Hezbollah through, quote, laundering funds and transferring oil revenues through opaque banking and shipping networks. But financial laundering represents just one aspect of this sophisticated operation. These vessels also transport physical materials that Iran's proxy forces require for military operations. Missile guidance components, drone manufacturing parts, electronic warfare equipment, and explosive precursor chemicals all move through compartments hidden beneath legitimate oil cargo. Think about the inspection challenge this creates. When maritime authorities board a tanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil, they take samples, confirm the petroleum content, and clear the vessel for continued transit. Meanwhile, in sealed compartments below those oil tanks, Missile guidance systems remain completely undetectable without physically dismantling the entire ship. This dual cargo system explains why the Treasury Department's February 7th sanctions statement specifically used the word deceptive. Intelligence agencies understand what's happening, but proving it requires evidence that vanishes the moment ships go dark. The Bella 1 case study proves how impossible enforcement becomes once vessels enter this shadow system. The Center for Strategic and International Studies tracked this single ship for an entire year, documented 379 suspicious rendezvous operations, recorded 4 months of complete invisibility, and witnessed multiple ownership changes. The result of all that investigation? One detailed research report. 0 arrests, 0 asset seizures, 0 meaningful consequences. That same vessel continues operating today. Now multiply that enforcement failure by 542 vessels, Iran's entire ghost armada, each one capable of identical deception tactics, each one potentially carrying dual cargo loads with weapons hidden beneath legitimate oil shipments, and all of it happening while diplomats discuss peaceful nuclear agreements in air-conditioned conference rooms. President Trump stated on February 6th that Iran, quote, looks like they want to make a deal very badly. He's absolutely correct, but not for the reasons he believes. Iran desperately wants comprehensive sanctions relief, legitimate oil export authorizations, and frozen asset releases. But they want all of these concessions while maintaining their ballistic missile programs, regional proxy networks, and military operations throughout the Middle East. The Oman negotiations focused exclusively on nuclear enrichment activities. No discussions about missiles according to Araghchi's statements, no conversations about proxy forces, no mentions of Yemen operations, no references to Hezbollah support, nothing addressing the threats actually destabilizing the region right now. Just nuclear enrichment levels, which Iran can pause and restart at will since the underlying infrastructure remains completely untouched. This represents exactly the deal Iran has been seeking for years. Temporarily freeze enrichment activities, obtain sanctions relief, flood international markets with oil exports that actually function as weapons shipment cover, rebuild their economy through sanctions evasion, fund proxy operations across multiple theaters, and when geopolitical timing becomes favorable, restart nuclear enrichment with all infrastructure intact and operational. The Ghost Fleet makes this strategy viable because even with nuclear site monitoring, even with enrichment verification protocols, even with International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors maintaining full access, these ships continue moving, generating revenue, and transferring weapons. The maritime component of Iran's strategy operates completely independently of nuclear negotiations. Here's the most disturbing aspect of this entire operation. American intelligence agencies understand exactly what's happening. Treasury Department officials know. State Department analysts know. Naval intelligence services know. They released those February 7th sanctions specifically to demonstrate their awareness of these activities. But knowing about illegal operations and successfully stopping them represent 2 entirely different challenges. According to the State Department's February 7th sanctions release, these vessels operate through shell companies registered in Barbados, UAE, China, Marshall Islands, Kazakhstan, Seychelles, Turkey, and India. That's 8 different legal jurisdictions, 8 separate enforcement mechanisms, 8 distinct court systems, all of which process cases slower than ships can change registration flags. Consider this example of how the system enables evasion. Maritime Mutual Insurance Association, according to Reuters' investigation from October 2025, provided coverage for 231 tankers carrying sanctioned cargo. That single company enabled the transport of $18.2 billion worth of Iranian oil and $16.7 billion in Russian energy products. One insurance provider facilitated $35 billion in sanctions violations. New Zealand authorities are currently investigating Maritime Mutual for money laundering and terrorism financing. Police raided their Auckland offices and confiscated business documents. Yet the company continues operating because shutting down international insurance providers requires extensive legal proceedings that move at the speed of court systems while ships move at the speed of diesel engines. This enforcement gap explains why Iran specifically requested talks in Oman rather than accepting Trump's military posturing. 8 hours of diplomatic negotiations provided 8 hours of reduced intelligence scrutiny, 8 hours when satellite assets focused on conference rooms instead of cargo vessels, 8 hours to complete whatever transfers required coordination and timing. The operation succeeded completely. Ships that went dark on February 6th remain invisible today. Treasury sanctions imposed on February 7th represent retroactive punishment for activities already completed. These sanctions cannot undo cargo transfers that already happened, cannot retrieve weapons already delivered, cannot prevent attacks carried out with previously shipped materials. Trump's carrier strike group continues steaming toward the Persian Gulf, representing billions of dollars in naval power, advanced destroyers, nuclear submarines, and sophisticated aircraft designed for conventional warfare. None of these assets can effectively combat 542 unmarked commercial vessels operating under false flags in international waters. You cannot bomb a ghost fleet, cannot blockade ships that don't report positions, cannot intercept cargo you cannot track. This represents asymmetric warfare perfected to an unprecedented degree. Iran cannot match American naval power through conventional military buildup, so they developed an alternative approach entirely. They constructed a maritime network that operates below the threshold, triggering military responses while remaining technically civilian, technically commercial, and technically legal until proven otherwise. When weapons transported by these vessels eventually impact Israeli cities, when Hezbollah launches missiles constructed from components shipped on Iranian tankers, when Houthis attack commercial vessels using drones assembled from parts delivered by the Ghost Fleet, Iran will maintain plausible deniability at industrial scale. The ships belonged to private companies, the cargo consisted of legitimate petroleum products, the transfers represented standard commercial transactions. The Oman talks will resume according to statements from both Iranian and American officials. Next week, same bilateral format, same location, same nuclear-only agenda restrictions. And while diplomats continue discussing enrichment percentages in climate-controlled rooms, the ships will keep moving with transponders disabled, flags changed, and cargo hidden. This isn't an intelligence failure. U.S. agencies know precisely what's happening. This represents a response failure because available tools, sanctions, seizures, and enforcement actions all require coordination across multiple jurisdictions and move too slowly to matter. By the time Treasury designates specific vessels for sanctions, those ships have already changed ownership, registration flags, and operational names. According to UAE maritime data from August 2025, 21% of Iran's Ghost Fleet operates under Panamanian registry, representing 116 vessels. Panama has received official notifications requesting these ships be deflagged. Some registrations were cancelled, most remained active because ship registries function as profit centers where every flag generates registration fees and deflagging eliminates revenue streams. The incentive structure systematically favors sanctions evasion over compliance. Ships register in jurisdictions with minimal enforcement capabilities. Insurance coverage comes from companies prioritizing profits over sanctions compliance. Ownership structures hide behind shell companies incorporated in tax havens. And cargo transfers happen in international waters beyond any single nation's legal authority. This system exploits every weakness in international regulatory frameworks simultaneously. Iran accomplished this while enduring what officials describe as the most aggressive sanctions regime in modern history. They succeeded not despite these sanctions, but because sanctions created economic pressures that forced operational innovation. Now they possess a proven system. 542 ships generating billions in revenue, transporting petroleum to fund government operations, transporting weapons to arm proxy forces, and accomplishing all objectives in plain sight because plain sight means international waters where no nation possesses authority to intervene. The February 6th diplomatic talks weren't genuine negotiations. They were elaborate theater performed for international observers, while real strategic activities occurred offshore. Ships moving, cargo transferring, weapons flowing, all undetected because attention focused on conference rooms instead of shipping lanes. Iran planned every aspect of this deception. They scheduled talks precisely when diplomatic cover was needed for fleet operations. They insisted on venue and format restrictions that minimized surveillance. They limited discussion topics to nuclear issues while maritime assets executed weapons distribution missions. This isn't conspiracy theory speculation. These conclusions are supported by official State Department sanctions from February 7th, Center for Strategic and International Studies reports from January 8th, United Against Nuclear Iran data from August 2025, and Windward Maritime Tracking Analysis from October 2025. All publicly available, all independently verified, all pointing toward identical conclusions. Iran successfully deceived American intelligence agencies, not through advanced technology or sophisticated equipment, but through precise timing coordination. They executed the largest sanctions evasion operation of 2026 while U.S. negotiators discussed nuclear limitations in good faith. The Ghost Fleet remains operational right now, hundreds of vessels, thousands of crew members, millions of barrels in cargo capacity. billions of dollars in revenue generation, and unknown quantities of weapons components being transferred to organizations that will use these materials against American allies and interests. Trump can deploy 10 carrier strike groups, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of precision missiles. None of this military hardware matters when targets systematically disable transponders, change identification weekly, and operate across 8 different legal jurisdictions simultaneously. These vessels are designed to be untraceable. Iran won this strategic round decisively. While international attention focused on Oman conference rooms, they repositioned their maritime assets. While diplomats discussed nuclear enrichment, ships transported weapon systems. While Trump threatened military action, Iran prepared for conflict by arming proxy forces from Yemen to Lebanon. Negotiations will continue with more meetings, additional discussions about enrichment levels, and breakout timelines and verification procedures. Throughout these diplomatic processes, ships will keep moving because that's exactly what ghost vessels do. They operate invisibly until the moment they deliver their cargo, and when proxy attacks escalate, when missiles strike targets, everyone will demand explanations. How did Iran arm Hezbollah despite comprehensive sanctions? How did weapons reach Yemen through naval blockades? How did this supply chain operate undetected? The answer remains simple. It happened while everyone watched diplomats in Oman, while intelligence focused on nuclear facilities instead of commercial shipping, while Iran demonstrated that modern warfare doesn't require winning battles, just moving cargo undetected. If you can transport cargo invisibly, you can deliver weapons. If you can deliver weapons, you can arm proxy forces. If you can arm proxies, you can wage wars without direct military engagement. Iran is executing this strategy right now with 542 vessels operating in international waters beyond enforcement reach, beyond sanctions authority, beyond consequences. The Ghost Fleet isn't just evading oil sanctions, it's revolutionizing conflict itself. And the most terrifying aspect is that nobody has developed effective countermeasures because you cannot fight enemies you cannot find, cannot track targets that deliberately remain invisible, cannot enforce sanctions when violators operate through 8 jurisdictions simultaneously. But there's something crucial I haven't revealed yet, something that completely changes this narrative. Remember those 14 ships sanctioned on February 7th? I explained they were carrying weapons beneath oil cargo, but that's not the complete story. 3 of those vessels weren't even oil tankers. According to detailed State Department sanctions documentation, Rayan Gas and Gas Crystal are LPG tankers, liquefied petroleum gas carriers managed by UAE-based Emphasis Marine Solutions. These ships transported Iranian ammonia and petrochemicals multiple times throughout 2025. Ammonia, not petroleum products. Why does this distinction matter critically? Because ammonia serves as a precursor chemical for manufacturing explosives. Chemical weapons analysis confirms that ammonium nitrate derived from ammonia is utilized in improvised explosive devices. The same aids that killed American soldiers in Iraq, and Iran is shipping these materials not to Chinese refineries, but directly to Houthi-controlled ports in Yemen. Treasury designation documents explicitly state these vessels made port calls at Houthi-controlled ports. This isn't sanctions evasion, it's weapons supply chain operations at industrial scale disguised as legitimate chemical commerce. Fortune Gas and Gas River represent 2 additional LPG tankers under Turkish management that, according to Treasury findings, carried Iranian ammonia at least 10 times during 2025. 10 documented trips, sanctioned only after deliveries were completed, chemicals already distributed. The routing analysis becomes even more revealing. The Bella 1 vessel departed Iran on February 3rd and went dark off Sri Lanka on March 24th, remaining invisible for 4 months. Where was this ship during complete communication blackout? The CSIS report documents the vessel conducted rendezvous operations off Iran's coast, 379 separate instances, but Sri Lanka to Iran isn't a direct route. The ship traveled elsewhere first. Shipping routes from Sri Lanka typically lead to 3 major destinations: China, India, or looping through the Arabian Sea toward Yemen and East Africa. If the destination was China, why disable AIS tracking? Chinese ports represent major legitimate buyers with established commercial relationships. Same logic applies to India, but if the route included Yemen, if transfers occurred in Somali waters, if the vessel accessed Houthi-controlled ports, then AIS must be disabled because that routing would constitute obvious sanctions violations. This pattern becomes terrifying when you realize the Bella 1 represents just 1 ship tracked intensively for 1 year. 542 vessels comprise Iran's complete fleet, according to maritime intelligence. How many similar 4-month disappearances are happening simultaneously? How many clandestine rendezvous points exist beyond current monitoring capabilities? Treasury sanctioned 29 vessels in December 2025, including Nebula Drift, Ether Sail, Tidal Rhythm, and Voyager Haven, all managed by UAE-based Phoenix Ship Management. According to official statements, they transported hundreds of thousands of barrels of Iranian petroleum products, including condensate, bitumen, and naphtha. Naphtha represents petrochemical feedstock utilized in chemical weapons manufacturing. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons confirms naphtha serves as precursor material for several banned agents, and Iran transports these chemicals through UAE-managed vessels to undisclosed destinations. The Flora Dooley, flying Barbados flag under Indian management, transported millions of barrels of Iranian fuel oil since April 2025. Millions of barrels from one vessel, multiplied across hundreds of ships, creates incomprehensible scale. All of this occurred while sanctions supposedly prevented Iranian oil exports during what officials called a maximum pressure campaign with the strictest enforcement in history. Yet Iran exported 25% more in 2025 than 2023. How is this possible? Because ghost ships ignore sanctions through systematic flag changes. Kuros 2 and Kuros 3 operated under Palau flags according to December 18th Treasury designations managed by Panama-based Kurtos Shipping Company. They transported hundreds of thousands of barrels of Iranian fuel oil and bitumen within the Persian Gulf since early 2025. Palau is a Pacific Ocean island nation with 18,000 residents. What does Palau understand about Iranian tanker operations in the Persian Gulf? Absolutely nothing. Flag registration represents business transactions. Pay required fees, receive flag authorization, no questions asked. According to UAE analysis from August 2025, Panama Maritime Authority registers 21% of the ghost fleet, 116 vessels total. Why Panama? Because Panama maintains the world's largest ship registry with over 8,000 vessels, and they cannot physically inspect them all. The registry generates revenue, not enforcement. St. Kitts and Nevis deflagged all 8 vessels that united against nuclear Iran identified. Tanzania's Zanzibar registry did likewise. Tuvalu ship registry followed suit. Responsible flag states exist, but Iran avoids responsible registries, utilizing flags of convenience from countries that ask no questions and enforce nothing. Iran exploited this regulatory system not through technological advancement or sophisticated weaponry, but by understanding legal loopholes and systematically exploiting them across hundreds of vessels in dozens of jurisdictions. While they exploited these weaknesses, they sat in Muscat conducting negotiations, with Araghchi telling Witkoff that Iran seeks fair and equitable negotiations, Trump claiming Iran wants deals badly, both sides performing for cameras while knowing real activities occurred at sea. The National Iranian Tanker Company operates 88 vessels according to Windward's October 2025 data. On October 12th, 52 of these tankers activated AIS transponders simultaneously, broadcasting positions openly throughout Malaysia's EEZ, Singapore Strait, and Chinese waters, all visible to monitoring systems. Then on October 16th, only 9 remained visible while the rest went dark again. Why activate tracking for 4 days, then disable it again? This was operational testing, measuring surveillance response times, determining how quickly intelligence assets react to sudden visibility, calculating how long monitoring systems require to reacquire tracks after ships disappear again. This represented rehearsal for the February operation during the week of diplomatic talks when intelligence assets would focus on Muscat diplomats instead of shipping lanes. Iran planned this months ahead. They knew talks were scheduled, knew Trump would deploy naval forces, knew where attention would focus, and positioned assets accordingly. While the world watched Oman negotiations, ships executed coordinated movements. While analysts debated nuclear timelines, weapon systems flowed to proxy forces. While Trump threatened military action, Iran prepared for conflict. Egyptian businessman Hatem Sakher's 7 vessels made documented port calls at Houthi-controlled ports, according to the February 7th State Department release. Not intelligent speculation, but confirmed port calls, vessels physically docking in Houthi territory, offloading cargo, then returning to Iran for additional shipments. This represents established supply lines, regular scheduling, reliable operations exactly like commercial shipping services, except these packages contain missile components attacking Red Sea commerce. Those attacks forced shipping companies to reroute around Africa, adding 10 days to transit times, raising global shipping costs, and impacting the world economy by billions. Ships delivering enabling weapons were sanctioned February 7th, after delivery completion, after damage materialization, after Houthis possessed the weapons. Retroactive sanctions represent paperwork, not deterrence. Despite comprehensive sanctions, Iran's oil exports to China continue at 15 to 17 million barrels daily, according to Iran International Reporting. Vortex Shipping Analytics confirmed full capacity operations with no slowdown from enforcement because enforcement requires international cooperation. Coast guards must board vessels, ports must deny docking, banks must freeze transactions, insurance companies must cancel policies. This requires coordination across dozens of countries and hundreds of entities, but Iran needs just one weak link. One registry refusing deflagging, one port allowing docking, one insurer ignoring sanctions, one bank processing payments. Just one failure point breaks the entire system. Maritime Mutual Insurance Association represented that weak link. According to Reuters' investigation, they insured 231 sanctioned vessels, enabling $35 billion in sanctions evasion. One company facilitated more violations than entire countries. New Zealand police raided their offices with investigations ongoing, but the company continues operating because legal shutdowns require court proceedings lasting years while ships continue sailing. Iran moves at business speed while governments move at legal speed. By the time courts issue rulings, ships have changed names multiple times, ownership has transferred repeatedly, and original sanctions targets no longer exist on paper. The Ghost Fleet doesn't just evade sanctions, it outmaneuvers the complete international regulatory system successfully with billions in revenue, thousands of shipments, and zero meaningful consequences. Trump can negotiate endlessly, deploy carrier groups, threaten military responses, but until someone develops methods for tracking 542 ships operating under false identities in international waters, Iran wins. They know they're winning, which explains Araghchi's calm demeanor in Muscat, Iran's agreement to additional talks next week, because negotiations provide operational cover. Talks don't threaten Ghost Fleet operations. Talks enable continued operations by focusing attention elsewhere. The fleet will sail, weapons will flow, proxies will attack, and Iran will deny responsibility every time. Prove it, they'll demand. Show evidence, track the ships, document transfers, prove Iranian government involvement. By the time investigators piece together shell companies, flag changes, ownership transfers, and cargo manifests, weapons will be fired, damage completed, evidence destroyed. This represents modern warfare without tanks, jets, or armies, just ships flying false flags, carrying dual cargo, operating beyond reach. It all happened while diplomats shook hands in Oman, while Trump claimed diplomatic victory, while Iran pretended to negotiate seriously. The real war was won at sea, quietly, invisibly, completely, and it's still happening right now as those talks continue and the Ghost Fleet keeps moving through international waters, beyond sanctions, beyond consequences, beyond anyone's ability to stop them.